What would you do if you wanted someone you shouldn't? That is precisely my situation for a few months. My name is Helen, and I am a recently married 30-year-old woman living everyone's dream. I have Xavier, a loving and dedicated husband, who takes care of all household expenses while I pursue my goal of being a recognized painter in the city where we live. Our relationship was as quick as his marriage proposal. We met through some friends of his at an art show where they were going to hang my first painting for sale, and he bought it that same night. I was so grateful to Xavier that I did not hesitate to accept all his attention and courtesies. There, after several dates and a short courtship, I said yes at the altar, even without even knowing his family well, or him knowing mine. In fact, we had met 4 times in total before marriage, since Albert and Marie, Xavier's parents, lived in a city quite far from ours. However, neither of them seemed to have any qualms against me. Instead, they were always attentive, asking about my work or any activity that was relevant. That is why, when my mother-in-law became seriously ill, I did not hesitate to go to her city and help Albert. At that moment, I had no idea that that decision would make me do something crazy. Xavier was happy with my decision since his job did not allow him to stop to take care of his mother, and he was worried about her health. For this reason, he was in charge of buying the plane tickets to take me to the city and assured me that my father-in-law would be waiting for me since he would be responsible for taking me home. I insisted that it was not necessary since Albert needed to be focused on what his wife needed. However, none of them cared about my opinion. In the end, I arrived at the city where my in-laws lived with everything I needed to stay for a couple of weeks. My mother-in-law was in the hospital, so I had to wear light clothes so I could stay and take care of her at night when it was allowed. The weather was so hot that I needed to let my skin sweat more often, so most of my clothes were short like the dress I was wearing at the moment I saw Albert waiting for my arrival. He turned and smiled briefly at me, even though his eyes had strayed and wandered over my body. I considered myself an average beauty. I had a toned body, but it wasn't too flashy, but if there was something I liked, it was making my assets stand out. In fact, when we started to trust each other, Xavier had mentioned that he had liked it. But even though I was admired by my husband every day, feeling my father-in-law's eyes on my body made me feel a tingle in my abdomen that almost made me let out a nervous laugh. "Thank you for coming," he said. "You're welcome," I replied. Once in the car, I did not hesitate to ask about Marie's health, to which Albert responded somewhat elusively. It was obvious that this was worrying him, so I decided to comment on other things, like how strange the weather in the city was for me, or the outfit he was wearing that day. That had made him smile and seemed to relax him as we toured the city in a large van. To be honest, Albert was good looking. Xavier had brought out many of his features, but I couldn't deny that the hardness of my father-in-law's features were something that my young husband did not yet have. It made him look so manly, strong, and very attractive, so much so that I scolded myself for thinking that way about someone twice my age. The day passed so quickly that when night fell, I found myself asleep on the couch. When I woke up, Albert's gaze was so penetrating that it scared me, but I quickly forced myself to smile at my father-in-law. "Sorry, I didn't mean to wake you, Helen." "No worries," I responded, smoothing out the non-existent wrinkles in my dress. "Something happened?" "No, it was just to inform you that today I will go to the hospital and that you can sleep." "But I came to take care of that," I replied. "Needless. Besides, I want to see my wife," he told me. I smiled. That's how sweet my husband was, so I couldn't expect anything less from his father. Seeing that sacrifice, I decided that my work at that moment should be that of Marie. I would make sure that my in-laws' big house, which exuded luxury everywhere, was sparkling and that Albert always had something to eat. I would assist him in whatever was necessary, even if I had to stay longer than I had planned. At first, I felt very alone at night because the family house was large, and they did not have help even when they were at an age where they needed it. However, I decided not to interfere in my in-laws' private affairs and to dedicate myself to helping. Precisely, the days were the complete opposite of the nights, because Albert's attention was focused on me. We talked about everything, from Xavier's childhood to stories about his marriage to Marie. They seemed like innocent talks, but I could notice how the friction between my father-in-law and I was becoming more frequent, as well as a rapprochement that, far from upsetting me, made me feel powerful. Everything seemed normal, even though I could feel my body reacting to those faint advances. I tried to convince myself that this was because Xavier looked so much like Albert, but to no avail. Especially after seeing him come out of the bathroom with a towel hanging on his hip, ready to change and take care of his wife. "Sorry, I didn't know you were in the room," he said. He was lying. He didn't seem embarrassed for letting me see what only his wife had observed. That seemed curious to me, because until now it was as if I were a guinea pig caught in a trap, so innocent that I couldn't fight back. But the night was cold and I felt very alone, so I decided to play my cards. Even though I thought it was just a harmless flirtation with someone who didn't see me as anything more than just his son's wife. "Really?" I said. He didn't move. Instead, her posture became rigid, as if he did not expect her daughter-in-law to suddenly change her somewhat timid attitude. I understood it. Because of my appearance, people used to think that I was afraid to face things, but deep down it was just a facade to hide the way I could read situations. Some like this, where it was obvious that Albert intended for me to see him, as well as the previous occasions where his skin had touched mine. "I think you did know," I continued, standing up after sitting on the large piece of furniture where I fell asleep. "You knew it very well because I have been lying here every night before you left," I told him. I approached him slowly to face him, not with the intention of seducing him, but very willing to follow a game of which I wanted to know the end. But just when I was close, his big hands caught my hips, making me let out a small scream. There, in the middle of his arms, Albert's warmth seemed to cloud a part of my sanity. The closeness of both of them was so intoxicating that I didn't understand why it didn't make me uncomfortable. Instead, the hardness of his eyes and his strong features made me want to shrink in that moment, surrendering to whatever he wanted to do. "This is dangerous," he murmured. I swallowed thickly without taking my eyes off his. "You look beautiful when you're blushing," he said after a few seconds in which I could only hear the frenetic beating of my heart. "Xavier won the lottery with you." After a few seconds, his face wandered over my neck, inhaling what seemed like my scent. That made my body react immediately, forcing me to tighten my legs so as not to succumb to the desire I was beginning to feel. "Do you think he'll mind if I taste a little of what belongs to him?" he murmured in my ear. A new silence took over the moment, one where only our labored breaths could be heard. Neither of us made any move to leave, much less Albert, who continued his journey along the skin of my neck. The attraction was there, floating like an electric current in the charged air. That's when it happened, his tongue passing over my neck slowly, almost tasting my skin. At that moment, my toes curled as in my core it felt like the crash of a storm that had been brewing. It wasn't long before his tongue did the same thing again, but this time on the opposite side. At that moment, I had forgotten who we were. Him, my father-in-law. I, her daughter-in-law. I was about to withdraw violently from that scene when he spoke again. "Delicious," he murmured under my gaze. My lips were parted, so I had no chance when I felt them being possessed by more carnal and violent ones. Albert's lips were thick and demanding, resting on mine as they exerted pressure. That almost made me lose my sanity, but I regained it when I felt his hands wander along my lower back, playing with the skirt of my dress. It wasn't long before we were on the same couch where I had fallen asleep the first time I got home. There he pushed me onto his lap, forcing me to straddle him. His hands massaged every soft or hard part of my body, while the contact between our centers became deeper and deeper. My skin adjusted to the aggressive touch that Albert's hands gave it, while my mind went crazy with every movement I made. It was so frenetic and wild that I even struggled to inhale, something that was unusual in my intimate encounters with Xavier, my husband. Xavier, whom I didn't miss in any of the rounds I had that night with his father. The next morning I woke up alone in the guest bed. I didn't know when I had fallen asleep, but I was in a very elegant silk nightgown, one that had Marie's name engraved on the back. My smile was so big in that fullness that I felt after having shared the hot moment with my father-in-law that it could only be erased by great remorse. And of course I felt it, but not as strongly as when I saw Xavier's face in his living room when he saw me in his mother's robe. My husband's eyes scanned me almost the same way my father-in-law had, only there was no trace of desire but of suspicion. Maybe it was my messy hair or the fact that I was wearing that robe, but I knew Xavier could tell that something had happened. "What are you doing here?" I asked confidently, trying to stay calm. "Aren't you glad to see me?" "It's not that," I said, smiling. "It's just a surprise. It is not like this." I tried to look for Albert's gaze, but that one was elusive. "I asked for permission to see Mom," Xavier replied flatly, "and now we will go to the hospital. Do you want to come?" I refused since I was not yet presentable. Instead, I decided to take care of the food again to wait for them both to return from visiting Marie. It was a long and tedious day, but filled with a lot of tension for me. The anticipation of what Xavier might say to me that night made me even bite my nails, a habit I certainly didn't have. It was late at night when Xavier and Albert arrived, one carrying the other. My husband couldn't stand up, so I decided to help my father-in-law carry him to his childhood bedroom. "Marie will be discharged tomorrow, so we decided to drink a little," Albert explained to me. I remained silent, observing my husband, who did not belong to himself, but being grateful because I had avoided being confronted by him. "Don't worry, he doesn't suspect anything," he told me in a whisper. I frowned, turning my face to face him. "What did you say to him?" "Nothing," he said, and shrugged his shoulders. "Only that you are an excellent daughter-in-law and that you took very good care of me." "Sure," I huffed. "You don't seem sorry," she said after several seconds of silence. "I mean, because of what we did." "You don't seem to be either," I replied, crossing my arms. "I'm not." The facade of a homely and dedicated man that Albert had put on since I arrived had been tarnished a little by our act, but hearing those raw words from his mouth surprised me. There, watching Xavier sleep while he let out some snoring, my father-in-law's body covered me from behind, taking me by surprise again. "If you want, sleep with your dear husband in this bed," he murmured in my ear like that time. "But if you're not, I'll wait for you at mine." The electric shock that my body felt was so extreme that I did not hesitate to take a bath with hot water. My mind was torn between what my body seemed to crave and what I considered to be the right thing to do. For brief moments, my brain seemed to scold itself for even considering Albert's proposal as an option. Taking into account that Xavier was in the same house, and although the slip did not feel bad or forbidden, I felt remorse after seeing my husband's face. But when I lay in bed and was hugged by my husband, I knew that desire would win at any moment. Xavier's hands were soft and treated me gently, even when he was drunk, while Albert's made my skin remember that he had been there, in every corner of my body. That's why I knocked on the door that led me to commit something crazy, but allowed me to free myself as I wanted, being needed by two hands that were not afraid to touch where they wanted to take me, to touch the clouds with my fingers. It didn't matter that my husband was in the other room, nor that my mother-in-law was sleeping in that same bed. I'd be selfish if it meant I'd have anyone's dream. On the one hand, a man with soft hands who would treat me like a princess, and on some nights, another with rough hands who would take me to know the pleasures of life. I know that what I did is something reprehensible. I would like to know your opinion. Would you justify my actions? Would you condemn me for it? I hope you're not too hard on me. If you want more future confessions, please like and subscribe to the channel. Thank you very much, and until next time. Partying was definitely one of the activities that was not among my favorite pastimes. I am not a party woman, noise bothers me, and I hate the idea of being locked in a dark place with sweaty and drunk people walking from one place to another. In my youth, I never set foot in a nightclub. and the closest I came to enjoying a nightlife atmosphere was when I ate at the bar of one of my college friends. It was around that time that I met the man who would become my husband 4 years later, Caesar. Since then, my nights out are in his company. The 8 years after our wedding, our outings were summarized in trips to the movies, last-minute shopping at the supermarket, and the occasional getaway to a restaurant on special occasions, always at Caesar's choice. Married life had felt like an extension of my single life, which is why I never minded having missed that stage of nights out that leave anecdotes. My life with Caesar was comfortable. Caesar is 5 years older than me. When I met him, he had just finished his university studies and was still living with his parents. At that time, our courtship was calm, without furtive meetings on the stairs of the building or touching under the blanket when we watched movies in the living room of his house. Caesar was always like that, and when we got married, the dynamic didn't change much. What did change was my dynamic with my best friend, Natalie. She was synonymous with fun. When we were students who could barely pay the rent for our cute room, Natalie was all sensuality, like a seductive siren that could break your heart. She was the kind of woman who could stop traffic, who would end up with her wallet intact if she managed to lock eyes with a group of guys who don't hesitate to swipe their card and brag about having hooked up with the sexiest girl in the place. Being her best friend gave me certain benefits, but I knew that when I stayed to watch a movie marathon on a Saturday night, Natalie was enjoying a crazy night in the company of some senior student. She had explored every nuance of her youth in a way I had never experienced, and now, with both of us leaving that student life behind, Natalie still retained a bit of that spark. My life had taken a 180-degree turn when I got married, and normality became just another memory of my youth. Fortunately, among so many changes, my friendship with Natalie remained intact, and although she was still single and I was married, we always did our best to adjust our schedules and meet to catch up. Natalie was the only proof of a life beyond Caesar, and it's not that I complain about him because I love him. But with Caesar, I had not known the love that burns, that type of love that lifts you up and makes you feel like you are floating in the air, like a bubble. Our love story had happened so naturally and without ups and downs that sometimes I wondered if there was something else out there, if I had missed something. And when we went through stretches of distancing, I wondered what I should do. I imagined myself as Natalie, strong and determined, wanting to throw my life away. Maybe that was the reason why, when I met with Natalie, I always had that thought running through my mind. What was I missing? But after a talk full of laughter, interesting anecdotes, and a couple of drinks that melted away the stress of routine, I dedicated myself to enjoying the freedom that the company of my best friend provided me. A friend who, unlike me, didn't think twice about going to a party. Far from it, to love without conditions, without ties. So it was that one Thursday night I received a text message from Natalie announcing that on Friday we would go out for drinks at a new place in the city. Sophie, please put on the dress I gave you last December. That place is promising, said Natalie's last message. I couldn't help but laugh because my best friend always knew how to anticipate events. Of course, the red dress she had given me one Christmas ago was still in the closet with the tag on. I hadn't even taken it out of the bag. But I knew that if I dressed differently tomorrow, I would have to endure a long lecture from Natalie. So for a moment, I said to myself, I can make an exception, of course. What can happen if I wear that dress? The world is not going to end. So when the next day arrived, and there were only 3 hours left until Natalie picked me up, I opened the closet and looked for the bag I had thrown in the back. When I found it, the deep, striking scarlet-red fabric surprised me. I carefully took out the garment and stretched it on the bed, trying to assimilate the V-neck line and the length, which would barely reach my knees. Without a doubt, it was the type of dress I would never dare to buy. Every detail of the garment was designed to highlight what drove men crazy. I put my fears aside and tried it on. The fabric was soft, It hugged my body as if it had been carved especially for me. I walked to the bathroom, and in the mirror, I could see several things. First, the dress reached the middle of my thighs. Second, the neckline was much deeper than I imagined, reaching the end of the breastbone. And third, the color flattered me, making my skin glow. It seemed like another woman looking at me from the mirror, a sensual woman. "Where did you get that dress?" Caesar asked when he entered the room minutes later. His analytical gaze had swept my figure from head to toe, and when our eyes met, I could read the annoyance immediately. As if his expression of displeasure was not enough, Caesar added disdainfully, "It doesn't look good on you." "It was a gift from Natalie," I responded without knowing what to say exactly. Caesar's words had left a bad taste in my mouth. I have always considered that Natalie has good taste in clothing, and that she is self-confident enough to know how to take advantage of her slender figure. I didn't think the dress was hideous or scandalous, much less that it didn't fit me. On the contrary, it made me look totally different from what I'm used to. With the dress, I felt powerful, capable of taking on the world. But for some reason, I didn't express it. And Caesar, accustomed to everyone doing what he wants, once again refuted that this type of dress only looked good on young girls and not on mature women like me, and that they were used for a certain purpose. That decent and respected women like me would be demeaned if they went out wearing something like that. During his tasteless speech, I remained silent, my hands busy looking for the accessories that would complete my outfit. But the anger got the better of me, and I ended up expressing what I really thought. "Well, what a shame," I responded with annoyance as I headed to the bathroom to finish getting ready, "because today I'm going to wear this dress." "This one?" Caesar responded immediately, following me to the bathroom and stopping in the frame. From the reflection in the mirror, I could see that he was blushing with annoyance. "You're not serious, right, Sophie? It's a joke." There was a strange tone in his voice. It was the typical tone parents used when their teenage daughters went out to the movies in age-inappropriate clothing. But I was not a teenager, I was a grown woman. My father had died 5 years ago, and Caesar had no reason to act like that. He had no right. "What did it cost you to tell me that I looked good?" "And where and who are you going out with?" he asked again when he noticed that she was upset. Caesar knew me well enough to know that when it bothered me, I wasn't able to express it. I was always silent. "With Natalie," I answered, but I instantly regretted it. "Will you go out with that one?" "Oh my God." Caesar shouted, "It's no wonder you're dressed like that. Did she force you to wear it?" "That? Of course not. Nobody forced me to wear this dress, and no one will force me to take it off just because they don't like it," I answered, fed up. Caesar went blank. He looked at me as if he didn't know who he was talking to, and after seeing that I did nothing to apologize, he left the room upset. An hour later, I left the room, ready for a night of fun with my friend. I didn't say goodbye to Caesar when I left, and although we exchanged glances, neither of us said anything. The reproach in his gaze was evident, but I didn't care. At 10:30, Natalie and I met at the entrance of the bar. It was called Sin. There was a line of 20 people waiting to get in. "It's good that we arrived on time," Natalie mentioned as she looked at the entrance of the establishment. "Inside, it must be total chaos." "I just hope we find a place to sit. These heels are killing me," I responded. "Are you the last in line?" asked a tall, handsome man. His dark skin was striking. "Yes, where do you come from? Are you foreign?" Natalie questioned sympathetically. "Yes, we are tourists." "My friend and I come from Costa Rica, and they from Mexico," the subject responded. "My name is Jose, and you?" "My name is Jose." "Natalie," she introduced herself, shaking her hand, "and this is my friend Sophie." "A pleasure, Natalie, Sophie," responded one of the subjects with a flirtatious smile. "I'm Francisco, my friend here Jorge, and that pair are Roberto and Marcos." "It's a pleasure to meet you, ladies. Do you want to accompany us?" asked the one who had been introduced as Marcos, another dark-skinned man with a green shirt and light eyes. He was incredibly attractive. "Yes, of course, but only if they are single," Natalie said with a flirtatious smile. They all laughed, and one of them, the one called Jorge, responded, "Single and without commitment. And you?" Natalie quickly responded that we were single, and when I turned to see her, ready to contradict her, I felt her pinch my arm. We spent 20 minutes in line, waiting to enter. At this time, Natalie wouldn't stop talking, and from time to time, one of them would ask me something. All that time, he had noticed the fixed gaze of one of them, the one called Jose. I couldn't help but feel nervous. When we finally entered the bar, the music was deafening. The waiters went from one side to the other, handing out beer, and those who were not at the tables eating were in the center of the bar, a small dance floor. The low lighting in the place made the atmosphere more intimate. It didn't take us long to locate a place, and the group of men soon requested an all-night service. Natalie had already gained confidence with one of them, and I remained a little quiet, sipping my drink while listening to them talk. "You want to dance?" asked one of them next to me. When I turned to see who it was Marcos, the other dark-skinned man that I had found attractive. For a few seconds, I prepared to reject him, but something in his gaze urged me to accept. Natalie winked at me when I handed her my wallet. Marcos and I walked to the center, looking for a space to dance. I didn't consider myself a good dancer, but the music was Caribbean and the alcohol made me loosen up. We were dancing for a long time, sharing laughter and the occasional inevitable touch. The night went like this. We stopped to drink and eat, and after a while, we went back to dancing. At one point in the night, we had all left the table and were crowding around each other on the dance floor. The sweat, the cigarette smoke, and the lights pulsating to the rhythm of the music had me ecstatic. But everything got out of control when Jose and Marcos locked me in a circle. As we danced, I could feel Marcos's hands holding my waist as he moved behind me, and Jose moving closer to me with each movement. I had never danced with two men at the same time, and the sensation was new and exciting. The alcohol had already done its thing on my body, so I moved against their bodies, and slowly we synchronized with the music. I wasn't aware of Natalie, the people around me, or what awaited me at home when the night was over. "You're beautiful, Sophie," one of them whispered in my ear. I could no longer identify which of the two was talking to me because we had merged in a slow dance that I couldn't think about. Sweat ran down my neck, but that didn't stop one of them from running his lips over my wet skin. In that moment, as I felt their bodies tighten around me, I knew what my body was screaming for. I didn't think about it, I just acted. I took them by the arms and guided them towards the bathrooms. I didn't know what time it was or if I would find a place private enough for us to continue our thing. But the alcohol made me think like someone else, and they could smell my intentions. We found an unoccupied bathroom, and one of them closed the door and locked it. I didn't stop to think if anyone could find us or if it was dangerous to be with two such large, imposing men that I barely knew. Nothing mattered. At that point, what happened next was inevitable. We locked ourselves in a cubicle as if possessed by an invisible force that ordered us to give in to our desires, and between the two of them, they made me theirs with intensity. The sensation of being surrounded by their bodies, feeling their great power within, led me to a wave of pleasure again and again, to the point where I felt like my body couldn't handle so many sensations anymore. Inside that cubicle, my red dress had had a different effect than Caesar's. The dress ended up on the floor after one of the two murmured in my ear that it looked amazing on me. I didn't know if that had taken me to heaven or if it had been the sensations of their hands on me or the way their brown skin contrasted with the paleness of my skin, but it felt amazing to feel so desired. Leaving the bathroom, the three of us walked back to the track, as if nothing had happened. as if what we did in a bathroom stall with passion had only been a figment of my imagination. 2 hours later, they had accompanied us to look for a taxi. We said goodbye with a laugh, and the moment I exchanged glances with Jose and Marcos, the three of us laughed as if we had made a prank. And maybe that's how it was. When I got home, Natalie shouted to me, "You're my hero, Sophie." I thought it was normal that Natalie considered me a hero and not an unfaithful one. What he had done that night could be considered a feat, so reducing it to a simple infidelity seemed wrong to me. After all, it's not every day you have an affair with two dark-skinned men in a bar bathroom. And now it's your turn. Do you think I went crazy or that what I did is justifiable? If you want more shocking confessions, remember to subscribe to the channel and hit the like button. Thank you very much, and until next time.
It is the law of life. People who seem shy are the most dangerous. I found myself entangled by one of them, one who, without a doubt, was forbidden to me. My name is Richard, and I am a man in my 60s. I started having children very young, so my 3 boys are now adults and of marriageable age. Especially Alexander, who everyone says is my favorite. I didn't consider myself having a favorite one, but I had to admit that he was the one who made me feel most proud. So when he introduced Isabella to the family, I was happy and pleased to see my son start his own family. In appearance, Isabella was a pretty, shy, and very kind young woman, something that pleased Mary, my religious wife, who was convinced that she would preserve the values we professed at home. However, I would soon learn that she was not as pure and chaste as she appeared. That day, we had gone to have sushi for dinner at a very expensive and popular restaurant. Isabella had arrived in a loose dress, showing as little skin as possible, with discreet makeup and a natural hairstyle. She always looked very neat, but that day she had an aura of perfection about her that really, she seemed to be the perfect woman. She was so kind and polite that she looked like a princess. At the same time, she carried on a quiet conversation with my wife, my son and me, to the point that if the incident in which I found out everything had never happened, I could have sworn that Alexander had married an angel. Until it happened. One call would completely change my perception of her. "I already told you I can't," she murmured. I was leaving the men's bathroom when I found her on the side, talking on her cell phone as if she didn't want anyone to find out. I stayed semi-hidden, spying on her conversation. That attitude was what alarmed me, since I was considered a very perceptive person who didn't miss anything. So when I saw her speak in a low tone and look around, I knew something was wrong and I should know. "I have an appointment with Alexander's parents." "No, I can't cancel." Then she let out a sigh, almost like a groan. "I want to go too, but those hateful people won't shut up." Those words took me by surprise and I gasped. I had never expected that this would be Isabella's perception of us, much less that words would come out of her mouth that, in our home, we would not consider decent. "Can you leave me the address? I promise I'll go as soon as I'm done here." Upon hearing that, I decided to return to the table. Mary noticed my general change in attitude and asked me what had happened. I did not want to go into details with my wife at that time, as I did not want to jump to conclusions. However, my mind was already beginning to wander. Was Isabella cheating on my son? Would she have another partner and wanted our family's money? Those were the questions that kept running through my head. At that moment, I was convinced that I had to find out if what my intuition was telling me was true, even if I had to go to the trouble of spying on my daughter-in-law. At the end of the evening, Isabella told Alexander that she preferred to go home alone. After several minutes of discussion in which my son insisted on taking her, I intervened, claiming that this spoke well of the person Isabella was, since it showed that she was self-sufficient and could afford something as simple as taking a taxi. "Let her go," I murmured, staring into her eyes. "Young ladies like a little independence sometimes, don't they?" She nodded. She took a strand of her perfectly placed hair and brushed it behind her ear, smiling sweetly. At that moment, a spark ignited in me, so I offered to pay for the taxi and told her to put the address into the taxi service I had on my phone. She hesitated, but finally relented and wrote down the address. As we said goodbye to her, my mind flashed back to the scene in the bathroom, leaving a bitter taste in my mouth. That was the last time I tried to ignore my doubts, but in the end I succumbed to what I felt I should do. There was something more behind Isabella's charming facade, and I needed to know what it was to alert my darling son. We continued the way to the house. I decided to drop my wife off at our house, and then make up a silly excuse for her that Xavier, one of my college classmates whom she didn't know, had returned to the city to meet up with me again. I knew that Mary would not suspect anything, since in her eyes I was a perfect husband who had never committed any fault, so a few pamperings and the promise that I would not return so late were enough to lead through the door of my house in search of the Isabella's secret. 20 minutes passed when I had reached the address in the app's history. There was no residence or anything resembling a house in that place. Instead, a large bar stood imposingly on the street, its facade illuminated by flickering neon announcing that the night was just beginning. The music escaped through the cracks in the door, carrying with it vibrations of what my children like to call electronic music. Around that place, the bustling street was dotted with neon lights and advertisements for other late-night establishments. The aroma of tobacco and perfume mixed in the air, while the night temperature was so low that it seemed like it wanted to freeze the city. I spent approximately 5 minutes admiring the night landscape, one that was full of ladies in low-cut dresses so short that I wondered if they were cold. At that moment I thought I had made a mistake, that perhaps Isabella lived somewhere nearby and the address had not been precise, because it didn't seem like a place she would frequent. But it wasn't until I saw her in line to enter the bar that I felt like the adrenaline was rushing through my back. She was wearing a tight black dress that clung to every curve of her figure, highlighting her shapes with great sensuality. Her back was bare, while a plunging neckline revealed more than it should. I gasped in surprise when I saw Isabella, having to blink several times to make sure it was her and not a mirage. That was my daughter-in-law, the one who dressed modestly to visit me and my wife. Was that what she was hiding? It couldn't be any other way that my body reacted upset to her. On the one hand, my head was confused when I discovered Isabella's secret, while on the other I could feel how my friend was starting to get excited at that sight, especially when I saw her bend down to pick something up from the floor. At that moment, I hesitated to enter the bar to find out all the details about the double life my daughter-in-law was leading, even without knowing that this would lead me to do something crazy. Inside, I blended into the crowd, trying not to be too obvious as I observed her behavior. After a few minutes of spotting her with a group of girls, I was not at all surprised to see that Isabella was far from the shy and reserved woman we all thought she was. The minutes passed while I watched her surround herself with several men. At the same time, she moved suggestively, drank from several glasses, and laughed scandalously. She was, without a doubt, another Isabella, one that stopped seeming perfect to me and seemed more human, one who would have no problem sinning. I decided to sneak up on her, trying not to crash into the middle of the drunk youths. I mingled among the people and finally reached her side. Undoubtedly, my presence there was striking as I was older, but she didn't seem to see me at first, as she was immersed in the frenzy of the music and lights. When she finally realized my presence, her eyes widened as she turned pale. "Mr. Richard, what are you doing here?" she asked. "Surprise?" I responded, trying to stay calm, even though I wanted to laugh at her expression. "Not as much as me." Isabella began to take each strand of her hair as she stroked it quickly. I soon understood that she was doing it out of nervousness, so I decided to get close to her ear and calm her down a little. "Don't worry, I won't tell Alexander," I mentioned. Her expression changed from fear to calm in an instant, to be replaced by doubt. "Why?" She shrugged. "It doesn't seem relevant to me," I said. "I just want to know why you do it." Isabella didn't seem convinced, but she took my arm and dragged me to a quieter place where the music wasn't so loud. There she told me that he knew that my wife did not like worldly women and that she really wanted to marry Alexander, because he seemed like a good boy who would make an excellent husband. She swore to me that she was in love with my son, and if it hadn't been for the fact that I had seen her rubbing her body against several men at the bar, I would have believed her. However, something else was happening while we were talking. It was evident that I was physically attracted to that version of Isabella, and although I wanted to do it consciously, I couldn't help but take my eyes off her body. I knew from her attitude that I wasn't the only one experiencing this. Her eyes shone brighter than usual while her hands played with her cleavage and neck. It was a clear indication that she was looking for something from me, but I wouldn't give in. Not without her being more direct. "Mr. Richard." "Just Richard," I told her. She nodded. Then, she wet her lips with her tongue, sat back in the chair and looked at me. "Richard, what do you want in exchange for not saying anything to Alexander?" "I don't need anything in return." "But I do." There was that voice again that I had heard in the restaurant bathroom, that whimper that would almost make me lose my mind at that moment. "I want to reward you for being a good father-in-law." I remained silent. At that point, there was something I wanted, but even after feeling that attraction for Isabella, I couldn't bring myself to ask for. However, she seemed to read my mind because she decided to take control of the situation and take me by the hand to none other than the bathroom of the bar. Even though my back was pressed against the wall of one of the stalls in the women's bathroom, and Isabella had placed the respective safety lock, I felt my body stiff with fear that someone might see us, that we might be taken out of the bathroom for inappropriate behavior. "Don't worry," she murmured in my ear. "Nobody here pays attention to these things." I didn't have time to relax my body when I felt her hand on my waistband, massaging while her mouth sought mine to settle into a rough kiss. It was so fiery and wild that I found it overwhelming at first, but I liked it because Isabella was in control of the situation. It wasn't long before she was on her knees as she had me in her mouth, moving her face back and forth quickly and forcefully. My mind was blank as I felt the heat in my area, at the same time as my hands were sinking into his hair. When I was about to reach my climax, I tried to pull back from her face, but it was impossible. She gripped my hips so tightly that I had no choice but to spill inside, watching as she deftly swallowed and wiped away any traces. I had not yet come down from my cloud when I saw her take off her clothes. With each garment that fell off, my friend felt more excited. At the same time, a satisfied smile formed on his mouth. Then, forcefully, she sat me down on the toilet chair to continue what we had started. My reward. As I sank into her, curses and complaints came out of her mouth that made me move with more impetus. I no longer cared about where we were, or that they could hear our bodies colliding. It was a sublime moment that I wanted to treasure, one that did not dissipate even when we had both managed to free ourselves together. Isabella came home one morning after several of our secret meetings. I had just gotten up when I saw my wife, my son, and my daughter-in-law sitting on the couch. For a moment, my heart wanted to jump out of my chest because of the fear that this caused me. I didn't want anyone to find out about our secret, about what I did the times I lied to my wife to see me with her. However, their faces were happy. "Dad," Alexander told me. "We have news." I nodded, sitting in front of them on Mary's side. "Alexander has proposed to Isabella," my wife announced excitedly. "Is that okay, Dad? Will you give us your blessing?" I stared at Isabella, who seemed like a completely different person than the woman who had been under my sheets the night before. It was so much fun to watch her carry on with her character, but she was doing it so well that I sometimes bought into her performance. At home, she maintained her image as a devoted wife and modest woman, but with me, she secretly revealed her wildest and most uninhibited side. "You can marry her?" I told him. Excitement shone in Alexander's eyes. I just smiled and watched Isabella cross her legs and straighten her hair. Of course, such a beautiful woman would be the perfect daughter-in-law, much more so when at night we could escape to that place where her legs would always welcome me. My son, to this day, has not found out anything about what is happening. I really know that what I have done is not being a good father, but I must admit that I keep falling into temptation and I can't help it. And now it's your turn. How would you judge me for my actions? If you want to continue seeing more similar content, I appreciate you hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. Thank you very much, and until next time.